I, like a lot of other musicians, saw a lot of our hoods wiped out entirely by the pandemic. And to have this kind of recognition was really life-saving. Some of the money went into my academy. I split some of the proceeds, and I started a small academy, the Gabriela Lena Frank Creative Academy of Music, for emerging composers like myself that feel that we can't split our voice from our identity, our cultural heritage. And it's in every note of every piece of music that I write, even if it's not ostensibly on a Latin American theme. I mean, I'm a Latina 24 hours of the day, 7 days a week, so I can't really get away from it. I think it has been important for me over the decades that I've been doing this is to constantly evolve and to even be surprising in how I'm drawing on my heritage, so that while the voice may be consistent, the themes I may draw on, or the instruments that I might write for, keep evolving as my own skill sets get better and better. So my heritage and my exploration of what it means to be multiracial, a middle-aged woman, a Gen Xer, composer, partially disabled. It's a complicated package of traits and attributes, and I think it's very American. I think that's what's so wonderful about this country, is being able to be surrounded, if we're open to it, surrounded by a multitude of life perspectives. So it's important for me to continue what I started when I was a teenager, which was exploring what it means to be Gabriela Lena Frank. GLFCAM, or the Gabriela Lena Frank Creative Academy of Music, was formed out of mainly an instinct at its impetus, which was that during this time when I came up with this idea to form a small nonprofit, the timing was during the election of 2016. And if one throws their memory back to this time, this was when we were in the middle of a really divisive election, and it was quite shocking to see how awful the national discourse was becoming. And I was part of that group of people, just increasingly dismayed and really worried about how things were going to turn out. And during a cross-country trip that my husband and I took in the car, we drove through really economically depressed and culturally depressed areas of the country, where I could see why certain kinds of messages that were so divisive would make sense or would be appealing. And we experienced some really one significant awful event of just out and out racism and hostility that changed everything for me. And I realized that I had to do something different other than enjoy a good career as a woman of color and in a field that does not recognize a lot of accomplished women of color. And that came to me, well, we have a large home now, having left the Bay Area a few years earlier, and I can open up this house for my younger siblings that are coming of age and create a safe space for people, all demographics, multitude of aesthetics, in various stages of emerging, whether as a student or a young professional, to create music together. And if this is out of my house, then I can handpick the people, both the composers that would be mentored and supported, as well as the performers who would do the mentoring and playing and premiering of their music through workshops. And that simple instinct over 4 years, we're still a pretty young organization, but in just 4 years, we've been able to become a force, a recognized nonprofit in the classical music world, and have started commissioning, have started opening the eyes of my composers even more to community work. And I realized that ultimately what I wanted to do was to provide models for my composers and open up some doors for them so that they could have a holistic life as an artist, that they're not just producing music for a new music series, but they're also out in the community and they're known and they can do teaching in public schools while they have a gig from Carnegie Hall, while they are part of a climate action initiative that brings together artists. And I think it's really teaching my composers how to be nomadic and to go into a bunch of different realms that are not necessarily the ones that are talked about in the music schools. Um, and I think this is what's going to bring classical music more into the 21st century, is being open to different voices and open to different avenues other than a storied concert hall to deliver our talents. So where I'm filming here, we're doing some renovation work at the main house where we live. And I'm a freelance musician with 2 mortgages. We bought a fixer-upper and we spent a couple years fixing it up. So this is one of the bedrooms with the, we commissioned these really beautiful bunk beds. This is a queen bed and a single on top from a young female carpenter in the area. And then we got some nice woodwork done here. So this is the so-called Mark Twain room, because this is the kind of wood that Mark Twain would have seen in his lifetime. We have a Bruce Lee room with Asian wood, and we have a Jimmy Cliff room, as in the reggae star, with the kind of wood you would see in the Caribbeans. And so this is where the composers stay when they come for the residency. Sometimes we put the performers instead here, and it's been super useful. So this is my temporary office until the renovation work is done up at the main house. And I think that you sometimes don't know when a moving experience is going to just come into your life. And one that was part of my time with the Detroit Symphony, not too long after they declared bankruptcy. So I was their composer in residence from, I think it was 2013 through the spring of 2017. Was in the last couple of years of that residency, I started dropping in as a guest with the music therapist at Detroit's Children's Hospital. And I'd never been in a company of 6 children like this. And these music therapists were incredible, and they took care of the doctors and nurses as well as the kids that often were going through such hard times. And there was a lot of sadness in that place, and they were really trying to bring in joy. And they were considered very important by the nurses and doctors because children have fewer inhibitions. So a pretty piece of music might actually get their numbers are up on their medical charts, that they really respond well to happy events and joyful events, and they're still children. So music therapy was really seen as truly therapeutic for them. I just remember some of these children still that I would go and improvise on a keyboard for, and we would do little songs and talk to them and speak with the parents. You could see the gratitude of the parents that we were coming in and just trying to brighten up the kids' day. And I remember also really being grateful that there are members of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra that were coming in, and they're taking off their professional hat and putting on a humanitarian hat, which can be really hard for us to do. We feel like this music's beneath me, or these people couldn't tell if I played a wrong note or in tune or not. And we need to step outside of that role as much as possible. I think it, again, will make us more relevant for the 21st century. And this experience with these little kids was one of the harder experiences I've been through, but it really it was transformative in many ways too. What keeps me awake at night right now is the threat of a really bad fire season. And California is drier ever than before. We didn't have a really wet winter. And my husband and I have been working feverishly over a number of years to protect our property. So have spent most of the money that I make as a composer hardening the property, as they say, which is thinning out the forest. And we put a new stucco exterior on the main house to make it resistant if fires should come to our door. And we have many tanks of water all over. We just put in a big pond, and it's endless. And I've learned how to chip uh, dead branches and wood, and use a string trimmer. I mean, it's just ongoing. You pick up skills as you need to when you finish the course on what they call prescribed fire burns. And we're out of prescribed fire burn season now, but this is intentional fire. It's what the Native Americans used to do. And it keeps the forest healthy, but it also makes it more difficult for fire to become truly destructive. So we are constantly in planning mode, and this is what keeps us up at night. As far as the role of the artist in being part of the conversation about the climate change, we're very good at performing and telling these stories. And of course, we can do that more. We can commission works that are about the climate crisis and try to get away from, I think, a couple of generation of works that were very well intentioned, but perhaps not taken seriously. If you write another symphony that sounds like the rainforest, it's almost a cliche that you're going to hear the chirping of insects and the rustling of the wind and the dewdrop dance. You know, it's just, so people roll their eyes and they don't take it seriously. And I think it takes time, just as it takes time to become an environmentalist and to really accept that we have all played a role in our lifestyle choices in getting to this dangerous place. It takes time to find your angle in about how you're going to tell your stories. So I started a project at the Academy called Composing Earth, which is one of our commissioning projects. That's a 2-year commitment on the part of our alums that choose to join it. We just started it this year. The whole first year, my alums meet once a month, and there are assigned books about the climate crisis and articles, documentaries that we watch, and it's kind of like a book club. And the group of 10 composers and I and a couple of my staff people, we meet and we just talk. And each week, a composer on Wednesday, so we get one today, sends out a little letter or a little update about what they've been doing, what have they been reading, something they think will be interesting to the rest of the group. And I encourage them to read cli-fi, which is climate fiction, from our colleagues in the area of literature about how they are often using a dystopian, but sometimes a utopian model for where we can go. So this way they have a whole year gestation to find an angle in. And one of my composers is going to write about the fact that she comes from a mining lineage in her family, and she's going to write about the miners. And another composer who's Iranian is going to pull on 9th century Persian text that predicted the climate crisis. I mean, it's pretty amazing how much knowledge we already have and how much life experience we already have that's pertinent. And I think this is what's going to be compelling and moving for an audience. The other part, of course, of the coin is our lifestyle. And I would even say that at this early point, this is the most important part to focus on, which is the day of the jet setting artist has to end. That has to be over. And I say that somebody that got on a plane a lot. I don't like flying, but I did it. And we have to look at other models for being. And this is where people feel like a deer in the headlights. Once you start thinking about not being able to travel for your gigs, people stop thinking through to the solution. And it's understandable. It seems completely insurmountable to have a career without being able to fly everywhere. But there is no music on a dead planet. And there is an organization by that name. And so we want to model at the Academy different ways in which the carbon footprint could be much more minimal than it is now, and yet go deeper in our music making and making connections within the musical community, but the non-musical community as well. I think our attitude was actually just get it out there. We give the syllabus to anybody that wants to look at it. And it's just a small one. You know, it was designed by our in-house scientist who's also working with us on this. That's an interesting idea. We do have a climate class that we're leading in June that's open for the larger public. It's a weekend virtual retreat. And my 10 composers will be special guests at the end. They'll be there for the whole weekend, but they will be talking about what it's like to go through this grief, to go through the fears that they have, because we do talk about that as well. So that's our most public offering at this time with that. But this is only year one for us, so who knows what shape it will take in year 2 and year 3. According to what our in-house scientist says, and some others that I've talked with, we have all the technology that we need today to go green. We have all the technology, we have all the money, we have everything, we have all the knowledge that we need. We just don't have the will. We sometimes point our fingers at the corporate, organizations, the corporations that are polluting and making it very difficult to make the lifestyle changes. But the artists have to make the change too. We can't do it alone. It's really hard for an emerging composer to go to a presenter and say, I don't want to be present for my premiere. They're trying to get their career going, and it's hard for them to say, can I stay home? Can we work virtually? Can I get readings of the work in progress? Or can you pay more money for me to travel by Amtrak and get a sleeper cabin so I can travel for 2 or 3 days to get to the premiere and come home? And even with the rising prices of flights right now, as the pandemic is beginning to ease up, train travel and comfort is quite expensive. So it's a little easier for somebody that has a higher profile professionally to ask for these things. And even then, it's really not guaranteed. But it is very frightening and very hard for an emerging artist to do. So presenters need to be part of this conversation. And this model of all of us being part of the conversation is necessary when you look at professors that are supposed to fly internationally and present papers instead of doing it virtually, but they need to present those papers in person because it looks better for their tenure profile. So the university, the larger entity, needs to be part of this conversation. It can't just be individual actions. So it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot. And unfortunately, I'm of the view that we'll have to suffer a bit more, unfortunately. And in the meantime, try and weather through more fire disasters, more floods, more derecho windstorms, more pandemics, which is a sign of environmental crisis, before people really realize, gosh, we're losing lives and livelihoods and many billions of dollars, and it would be better for us to change direction. And we'll see when we get there. That's a very interesting question. I never really thought about if there was somebody that inspired me to speak about myself in this way. I've had a lot of good models in my life, teachers that were very articulate, very gracious, really full of hospitality. They just conveyed a deep interest in who their listeners and who their collaborators were. I think some in public school, but starting with my music training, I think my primary piano teacher, Jeannie Fisher, was a really big influence in that way. She was just so warm and giving. Her husband, Norman, was really wonderful with audiences. Sam Jones, my first really significant composition teacher, was wonderful in terms of just oozing that kind of openness about who he was and the way he was able to talk about the things he loved and why he wanted to share this with people. And I've had primary teachers at my second alma mater at the University of Michigan, the first being Rice University. The second at University of Michigan, I remember one talk with my primary piano teacher, Logan Skelton, who really turned me on to Bartók. He was a big Bartók pianist, and one of his specialties was also Liszt. And he was going to a small conservative community of older school teachers, piano teachers, that liked a lot of the old classics and really didn't like a lot of modern music. And he wanted to introduce them to Bartók, and I went with him and I watched what he did. It was really masterful. He started off with Bartók's Juvenilia, little piece that he wrote as a little boy, and then brought Bartók through the ages. And by the time he got to playing the big solo piano sonata, that audience was eating out of his hand. And he was super charming, and they all felt like his mom and dad. And you know, it was really, really great. So I think that left a big impression on me about being open about your loves and how that has informed your choices as a music maker. To anyone who is aspiring to be a composer, whether you're young or not, but maybe perhaps this message is for those that are younger. 2020 is what it looks like when the world is telling you it's time to change. And this is your generational prerogative, is to take things that you see from the past, really look at the past, and take things that you see in absolute terms as valuable and carry those with you, and then try to open the doors and get the skill sets to fashion this world in your vision, fashion the 21st century world, so that it's truly 21st century and not just a continuation of the 20th century, which was in our field already out of date. And this beloved field of ours has long considered itself exempt from being with the times, and that's no longer tenable. So even if you don't know what that looks like, what the 21st century looks like, there are things that you can do now, in which is to meet people, work with a lot of different people, trust your instincts. If something just doesn't seem right, even after you've stuck with it for a while, it may not be for you. And trust that the music conservatory is about 10% of what you will need. And that can seem really daunting, but you may not need 3 degrees. You might be able to stop after undergraduate and try an intern or work. I think the music conservatory world is going to change quite a bit over the next decade in terms of the repertoire that they will ask you to learn, and the Western-oriented theory that they will ask you to learn may adjust and open you up to other non-Western ways of thinking about music. And if it doesn't, you will need to do this yourself. And you have this marvelous internet at your disposal. We communicate and find people, but you're going to have to be more of a detective. In some ways, I envy you, because this was the kind of environment that I needed when I was coming of age in the 90s. And I managed to do things within the conservatory, and I got a lot out of it. I really did. But there were a lot of things that wasn't going to do for me. I wanted to go to Peru so that I can write a string quartet better. Most people were going to Vienna and Paris and Berlin for this kind of thing. And I wanted to do volunteer work, and that was not something that was really supported. I had to do that on my own time, and I wanted to study Latin American music. There were never any courses that were offered. So I found support in the women's studies department and romance language department, or I just made money on my own and funded my own trips. So I think some of those kinds of strategies will probably really be good for you. I would question whether you need to really go into monstrous debt in order to become a musician. And I don't think you should. I think you should spend a fraction of that amount of money, take years off from school instead, use that to get great lessons with incredible teachers, and try to do short-term programs, festivals, or short-term academies, and meet people and grow your skill sets. This is a changing world, and you're at the crossroads, and sticking to old methods, I think, will not serve you well. So that's what I would say. And I would also end on a positive note, which is you are really needed. That if you want to do this, I love my job. I love what I do. I think you'll love what you do if you're smart about the steps you take, knowing that you're needed. I hope that people will continue drawing on the arts, and as artists themselves in our field is evolving very quickly. I think the pandemic really showed us that we had to evolve and to become more strongly rooted within the community, that we couldn't be just married to old ways of doing things. And I think conversations like what you're brokering through the series are part of that change. So thank you for having me.